My name is Cora Bennett, and I'm 26 years old. I work as a librarian in a small town in Connecticut, living a quiet life far away from my family. People always ask me why I don't visit home more often, why I spend holidays alone, why I never talk about my parents. I smile and change the subject. I never tell them the truth. The truth is complicated. The truth is painful. The truth is that some families look perfect from the outside, but are broken in ways you can't see. I grew up in a house that was always empty, even when people were in it. My parents worked constantly, chasing promotions and bigger paychecks and the next impressive thing they could buy to show the neighbors. My mother was a real estate agent who lived for closing deals. My father was a corporate lawyer who measured his worth in billable hours. They provided everything I needed except the one thing I wanted most: their time, their attention, their love. But I had my grandmother, Dorothy. Grandma Dorothy was my everything. While my parents were at another business dinner or networking event, Grandma was the one who picked me up from school. She was the one who made me chicken soup when I was sick. She was the one who sat with me for hours, teaching me to read before I even started kindergarten. Her patient voice sounding out words while I curled up next to her on the couch. Grandma lived in a beautiful old house on Maple Street, the kind with creaking wooden floors and windows that let in golden afternoon light. Every room told a story. But my favorite place in the entire world was her sewing room on the second floor. That room was magic to me. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat her collection. Dozens of porcelain dolls from the 1920s and 1930s. Each one dressed in delicate silk and lace. Each one with glass eyes that seemed to hold secrets from another time. Grandma would lift them down carefully, one by one, and tell me their stories. "This is Charlotte," she'd say, holding a doll with auburn curls and a green velvet dress. "I found her at an estate sale in Boston in 1964. She belonged to a little girl who grew up to be a famous pianist." Or she'd show me Eleanor, with her porcelain face painted so delicately you could see the tiny freckles across her nose. "Eleanor's dress is real silk from Paris," Grandma would whisper, like we were sharing the most important secret in the world. And then there were the quilts. My grandmother made quilts by hand, spending months on each one, stitching late into the night when her arthritis wasn't too bad. Each quilt told a story through its patterns and colors. She made one for my birth, soft pink and yellow squares with my name embroidered in the center. She made another when I learned to read, covered in tiny books and stars. Every important moment in my life, Grandma captured in thread and fabric. My parents thought it was all junk. I remember my mother standing in Grandma's sewing room once, wrinkling her nose. "Mom, why do you keep all this dusty old stuff?" she said. "These dolls are creepy, and the quilts are just taking up space. You could sell this house and move into a nice modern condo." Grandma just smiled sadly and didn't answer. But later, when my mother left, she pulled me close and said, "Some people see price tags, sweetheart. But you and me, we see memories. We see love." When I was 12 years old, Grandma sat me down in that sewing room on a Sunday afternoon. The light was coming through the windows just right, making the dust particles look like tiny stars floating in the air. She took my hands in hers. Her hands were old and wrinkled, marked with age spots. But they were the hands that had wiped my tears and braided my hair and held me when I was scared. "Cora, sweetheart," she said, her voice serious, "I need to tell you something important. When I'm gone, all of this is yours. Every doll, every quilt, every piece of fabric in this room. Not because you're my only grandchild, but because you're the only one who loves these things the way I do. You see what I see? You understand that things can hold love, hold memory, hold pieces of people's souls." I started crying. I didn't want to think about Grandma being gone. She squeezed my hands tighter. "Don't cry, baby. I'm not going anywhere yet. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll take care of these things. Promise me you'll remember the stories. Promise me that when you touch these dolls and wrap yourself in these quilts, you'll remember how much your grandmother loved you." I promised. And I meant it with every piece of my heart. 3 years ago, on a cold November morning, my grandmother Dorothy passed away in her sleep. She was 1 years old. I was the one who found her, still in her bed, looking peaceful like she was just dreaming. I held her hand even though it was already cold, and I whispered, "I'll keep my promise, Grandma. I swear I'll keep my promise." The funeral was small. My parents cried the appropriate amount, said the appropriate things, accepted condolences from neighbors with appropriate sadness. But I saw how quickly my mother's eyes would dart to her phone, checking messages from clients. I saw my father talking to another lawyer about a case during the reception. They were already moving on, already calculating, already planning. A week after the funeral, Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, read the will in his small office that smelled like old books and coffee. My parents sat across from me, and I could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and read the important part slowly, carefully. To my beloved granddaughter, Cora Marie Bennett. I leave my entire collection of porcelain dolls, all handmade quilts, and the complete contents of my sewing room. These items are bequeathed solely to Cora, as she alone understands their true value. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face turned red. My father's jaw clenched. "That's it?" My mother said, her voice sharp. "She leaves Cora a bunch of old junk and we get nothing." Mr. Harrison looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Bennett, the house and all financial assets are to be divided equally among all heirs, as stated in the previous section. But Mrs. Dorothy was very specific about the collection. It belongs to Cora." My parents didn't speak to me the entire drive home. But that night, my father called. His voice was controlled, measured, the way he spoke to difficult clients. "Cora, we need to talk about your grandmother's things. You live in a tiny apartment. You don't have room for all that stuff. We think the best solution is to sell everything and split the money 3 ways. It's only fair." My hands started shaking. Dad, Grandma left those things to me specifically. She made me promise to take care of them. "They're not for sale." There was a long pause. Then my mother's voice came on the line. She must have been listening on another phone. "Cora, don't be selfish. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly at the end. She was old. We're your parents and we're telling you this is the right thing to do." I thought about Grandma's hands holding mine. I thought about her voice making me promise. "No," I said quietly. "The answer is no." My mother made a sound of disgust. My father sighed like I was a stubborn child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Fine," he said. "But you need to come get all of it then. We're not running a storage facility." Here's where I made my mistake. The mistake that would haunt me for 3 years. I believed them when they offered a compromise. "Cora," my father said, his voice softening, "we know you don't have space right now. How about this? We'll keep everything safe in our attic until you're ready. We won't touch anything." "We promise." I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. Because the alternative, taking everything to a storage unit I couldn't afford, seemed impossible. So I said yes. And my father, looking me directly in the eyes, said, "I swear on your grandmother's memory, we won't touch her things. They'll be waiting for you whenever you're ready." I visited twice a year after that. Every visit, I'd climb up into the attic and check on the collection. The boxes were dusty but untouched. The dolls were still carefully wrapped in tissue paper. The quilts were still folded in protective plastic. Everything seemed fine. My parents were distant during these visits, but that was normal for us. We'd have awkward dinners where we talked about nothing important. They'd ask about my job. I'd ask about theirs. We'd avoid talking about Grandma. We'd avoid talking about anything real. But last Tuesday, everything changed. I was at work shelving books in the history section when my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Cora Bennett? I just bought something from your parents at their yard sale. You need to call me immediately. This is about your grandmother's collection." My vision blurred. The book I was holding slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a loud thud. My coworker Sarah rushed over. "Cora, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Couldn't speak. I just stared at those words on my screen. "Your grandmother's collection bought yard sale." I called the number with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. A man answered on the first ring. Miss Bennett. Thank God you called back. My name is James Morton. I'm an antique dealer here in town. I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you give your parents permission to sell a complete set of vintage porcelain dolls and handmade quilts? The world tilted. No, I whispered. Those were my grandmother's. She left them to me in her will. My parents were keeping them safe. They promised. The silence on the other end lasted forever. Then James Morton said the words that would change everything. Miss Bennett, I'm so sorry to tell you this. Your parents sold your grandmother's entire collection to me this morning at a yard sale. They sold everything for $20. But here's what they didn't know. What they couldn't have known. That collection you're talking about. It's worth over $50,000. I don't remember the drive to my parents' house. I don't remember getting in my car or what roads I took or if I obeyed traffic laws. All I remember is the white-hot rage burning in my chest and the sound of my grandmother's voice in my head over and over. Promise me you'll take care of these things. Promise me you'll remember. I had promised. But I had trusted the wrong people to help me keep that promise. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, their garage door was open. I could see boxes and old furniture scattered across the lawn with bright orange price tags still stuck to them. A yard sale. They'd had a yard sale. My grandmother's precious. Memories had been laid out on folding tables next to old toasters and used books. Marked for $20 total, like they were nothing. Like she was nothing. My mother must have heard my car because she appeared at the front door wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she saw my face, her expression shifted from surprise to something like guilt. But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. Cora, what are you doing here? You didn't call ahead. I got out of my car and walked toward her, my legs moving on autopilot. Where's Dad? My voice sounded strange, hollow. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. He's inside, Cora. What's going on? You're being dramatic. Dramatic. That word ignited something inside me. I pushed past her into the house, not caring that I was being rude. Not caring about anything except finding my father and making them both explain. He was in the living room reading the newspaper like it was just another Saturday. Like he hadn't just destroyed the last connection I had to the person who actually loved me. You sold Grandma's collection, I said. My voice was shaking but loud, echoing in their pristine living room with its expensive furniture and decorator pillows. You sold everything she left me for $20 at a yard sale. My father's face went completely pale. The newspaper slipped from his hands. My mother came up behind me and I could feel her presence like ice. Cora, calm down, she said. But her voice had that edge it always got when she was about to justify something terrible. We needed the space in the attic. You never came to get those things. We assumed after 3 years that you didn't actually want them. I spun around to face her. You assumed? You assumed. Tears were burning in my eyes now, hot and angry, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not when they were looking at me like I was the unreasonable one. Called you every few months to check on the collection. Every single time I visited, I went up to the attic to make sure everything was safe. I told you that I was saving money for a bigger apartment so I could take everything home. You knew. You both knew. My father stood up slowly, his lawyer face sliding into place, the one he used when he was about to spin a story. Cora, sweetheart, we didn't think you were serious. You've been saying that for 3 years. At some point, we had to make a practical decision. A practical decision. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, you looked me in the eye 3 years ago and swore on Grandma's grave that you wouldn't touch her things. You swore. Those were your exact words. I swear on your grandmother's memory, we won't touch them. Do you even remember saying that? Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe. Or just irritation at being caught in a lie. Things change, Cora. We're sorry if you're upset, but what's done is done. We sold them to some antique dealer for a very fair price. $20, I said flatly. You sold them for $20. My mother crossed her arms defensively. He seemed happy with the price. He didn't complain. I laughed then, a bitter sound that didn't sound like me at all. That's because he's an honest man, Mom. More honest than either of you. Do you want to know what he told me? Do you want to know why he tracked me down and called me? They were both staring at me now, and I saw the first hint of fear in their eyes. Good, they should be afraid. James Morton is a professional antique dealer. He's been doing this for 30 years. He called me because he felt guilty. He called me because he knew something was wrong. And do you know what he told me? He told me that Grandma's collection, the one you sold for $20 without my permission, it's worth over $50,000. The color drained from my mother's face. So my father actually stumbled backward and sat down hard on the couch. That's impossible, my mother whispered. They were just old dolls. It's just old blankets. They were museum-quality porcelain dolls from the 1920s, I said, my voice breaking now despite my best efforts. They were hand-stitched quilts made by a master seamstress. They were my inheritance. They were my grandmother, and you sold them like garbage because you wanted space for more of your junk. My father found his voice, but it was weak. Cora, if we had known they were valuable, we never would have. You never would have what? I interrupted. You never would have stolen from me. Because that's what you did, Dad. You stole from me. You both did. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that even if they were worthless, even if they were actually junk like you thought, you still had no right to sell them. They were mine. Grandma wanted me to have them, not you. She knew, God, she knew what kind of people you were, and that's why she made sure to write it specifically in her will. My mother's face hardened then, transforming from guilty to angry in an instant. How dare you come into our house and accuse us of being thieves? We're your parents. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. You're being ungrateful and selfish. Selfish. The word came out as a sob. I'm selfish because I wanted to keep the only things I had left of the only person who ever actually loved me. You didn't raise me, Mom. Grandma did. You were too busy selling houses and networking and caring about what the neighbors thought. And now you've taken her away from me again. You've erased her for $20 and some attic space. The silence that followed was broken only by my ragged breathing. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother's jaw was set in that stubborn way that meant she would never, ever admit she was wrong. And in that moment, standing in their perfect living room in their perfect house, I realized something that made my heart break all over again. They didn't care. They truly didn't understand why I was so hurt. To them, this was about money and space and practicality. They couldn't comprehend that they'd just sold my heart for $20. You have 2 weeks, I said quietly, heading toward the door. 2 weeks to make this right, or I'm calling a lawyer. My mother's voice followed me out. If you wouldn't dare sue your own parents. I turned back one last time. Watch me. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I couldn't stop shaking. My breath came in short gasps, and twice I thought I might actually be sick. Everything I'd been holding on to for 3 years, every memory, every story. Every piece of my grandmother that I'd carefully preserved in my heart felt like it was slipping away through my fingers like sand. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called James Morton back. My voice cracked when he answered. Mr. Morton, says Cora, I'm sorry to bother you again, but I don't know what to do. I confronted my parents and they don't care. They just don't care. Miss Bennett, he said gently, where are you right now? I'm sitting outside their house. Can't seem to make myself drive away. There was a pause, and then he said something that made me start crying for real. Come to my shop. I know. I think you need to see your grandmother's things. And I think we need to talk about what happens next. His antique shop was in the old part of town, tucked between a used bookstore and a coffee shop I'd never noticed before. The sign above the door read Morton and Son Fine Antiques in elegant gold lettering. When I walked in, a small bell chimed, and the smell hit me immediately. Old wood, furniture polish, and something else. Something that reminded me of Grandma's house. Lavender and Thyme. James Morton was waiting for me near the back of the shop. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and glasses that sat on the end of his nose. But it was his eyes that got me. They were kind, genuinely kind, in a way I hadn't seen in so long. "Miss Bennet," he said softly, "I'm glad you came." Then he stepped aside, and I saw them. My grandmother's dolls were displayed on a beautiful antique shelf with glass doors, each one positioned carefully with proper lighting. The quilts were draped over vintage display racks, the colors and patterns visible in a way they'd never been in my parents' dusty attic. Charlotte with her auburn curls and green velvet dress. Eleanor with her porcelain face and Parisian silk. Rose, Margaret, Catherine, all of them looking like they were finally home. My legs gave out. I actually collapsed onto a nearby chair, my hand pressed against my mouth to hold back the sobs. James didn't say anything. He just let me cry. And after a moment, he quietly brought me a box of tissues and a glass of water. "I'm sorry," I've finally managed to say. "I'm sorry, seeing them here, seeing them taken care of like this, it's more than my parents ever did." James pulled up another chair and sat down across from me. "Miss Bennet, I need to tell you something. I've been doing this work for 37 years. My father did it before me. I've seen thousands of estate sales, yard sales. It's people selling family heirlooms because they need money or space, or because they don't understand what they have. But this morning, when I saw your parents selling these items, something felt wrong." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Your mother was in a hurry. She kept checking her watch, telling me to just take everything for whatever I wanted to pay. Your father barely looked at what they were selling. And when I specifically asked if everything was theirs to sell, if there was any family who might want these items, your mother laughed. She actually laughed and said, 'Trust me, nobody wants this old junk.'" Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. James continued, his voice careful but firm. "I paid them $20 because that's what they asked for, and frankly, I was afraid if I offered more, they'd realize these items had value and take them to someone less scrupulous, someone who wouldn't try to find the real owner. Because, Miss Bennet, the moment I got these dolls back to my shop and really examined them, I knew. These aren't just collectibles. This is someone's legacy." He stood up and walked over to the display, carefully taking down the doll I'd called Charlotte. He brought her to me, and I took her with trembling hands. She was exactly as I remembered, exactly as Grandma had shown me 100 times. "Each of these dolls is from the 1920s, James said quietly. "Original clothing, original wigs, no damage. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. And the quilts, Miss Bennet, those quilts are masterpieces. Hand-stitched with techniques most people don't even know anymore. The smallest one alone is worth $3,000. Couldn't breathe. $3,000 for one quilt. Grandma had made 15 of them." "Why are you telling me all this?" I whispered. "You bought them legally. You don't know me anything." James sat back down and looked at me with those kind eyes. "Because legally and morally are two very different things. Yes, I own these items now. I paid for them in what the law calls a good faith transaction. Your parents had possession, they claimed ownership. I had no reason to doubt them. So legally, these are mine." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "But morally, these belong to you. A grandmother left them to her granddaughter. That's not just property, Miss Bennet. That's love. That's history. That's everything that matters in this world beyond money." I don't understand," I said. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to make this right as I can. Here's what I'm proposing, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. I'll take this collection to auction. I have connections with the best auction houses in New England. We'll get every penny these items are worth. And when they sell, we split the proceeds. You get 70%. I keep 30 for my time, my expertise, and my initial investment. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. But you could keep everything. You could sell them and keep all the money. Why would you do this? James smiled sadly. My mother collected teacups. Hundreds of them, from all over the world. When she died, my brother sold them at a garage sale for 50 cents each while I was out of town. I know what it feels like, Miss Bennett, to have someone treat your heart like garbage. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to do better, to be better, I would take it. This is that chance. I held Charlotte close to my chest and cried. This stranger, this man I'd never met before today, was showing me more kindness than my own parents had in years. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, he said gently, because I think there's something else you need to do. Something harder than accepting my help. He met my eyes steadily. I think you need to make your parents understand what they've done. Not just financially, but morally. And I think you might need a lawyer for that. That night, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by papers. James had given me copies of everything. Professional appraisals. Photographs of each doll from multiple angles. Close-ups of the quilts showing the intricate stitching. The hand-dyed fabrics, the tiny signatures Grandma had embroidered in the corners that I'd never even noticed. Each quilt was signed. Dorothy Bennett, made with love. The dates ranged from 1985 to 2018. 33 years of my grandmother's life. Stitched into fabric, I ran my fingers over the photographs and something inside me shifted. At first, I'd just been hurt, devastated. But now, looking at the evidence of what my parents had thrown away. What they'd valued at less than a dinner at their favorite restaurant, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and clear and absolutely certain they needed to understand. Not just know, but truly understand what they'd done. I could take James's generous offer and walk away. Part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my parents loved me somewhere deep down, wanted exactly that. Take the money, rebuild my collection piece by piece, and never speak to them again. It would be easier, cleaner. It would hurt less. But then I remembered Grandma's voice. Not the gentle voice from the sewing room, but the voice she'd used exactly once. When I was 16 and came home crying because some girls at school had bullied me, I'd wanted to hide, to let it go, to pretend it didn't matter. Grandma had taken my face in her hands and said, Cora, baby, I love your kind heart. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's just letting people walk all over you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stand up and say, no more. I picked up my phone and called the one lawyer I knew personally. Rebecca Chen had gone to college with me. And we'd stayed friends even after she went to law school and I went into library science. When she answered, I could hear noise in the background. She was probably at some social event. Cora, hey, what's up? This is a surprise. Rebecca, I need help. Legal help. Do you have time to talk? The background noise disappeared. She must have stepped outside. Of course. What happened? I told her everything. The whole story spilled out of me. Grandma's death, the will, my parents' promise, the 3 years of trust. The yard sale, James Morton, the $50,000 value, all of it. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Cora, Rebecca finally said, and her voice had transformed from friendly to professional. Are you telling me your parents sold items that were specifically bequeathed to you in a legal will? Items they had no ownership rights to without your knowledge or consent? Yes. And you have documentation? The will, the appraisals, proof of the sale? Yes, all of it. Another pause. Cora, this isn't just a family dispute. This is conversion of property. Possibly fraud. You have an incredibly strong case. If you want to pursue this, we can make them very, very sorry. Something in her tone made me close my eyes. Rebecca, I don't want to destroy them. I just want them to understand. I want them to feel, even for a moment, what they made me feel. Then we'll make them understand," she said firmly. "Here's what we're going to do." Over the next week, Rebecca and I built our case like architects designing a building. Every beam had to be perfect. Every support had to be unshakable. We documented everything. She requested official copies of Grandma's will from the probate court. We had James write a detailed statement about the purchase, including the conversation with my parents and his professional appraisal of each item. Rebecca found comparable sales at auction houses, building evidence that the collection's value wasn't just James's opinion, but market reality. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She found other family members, distant cousins I barely knew, who remembered Grandma's collection. One cousin, Emily, sent a 3-page email describing how Grandma had shown her the dolls at a family reunion in 2010, explaining that they would go to me someday because I was the only one who saw their souls. Another cousin remembered Grandma working on a quilt at a Christmas gathering, telling everyone it was for Cora's hope chest. These people, who I'd only met a handful of times, were willing to testify to my grandmother's intentions. They were willing to stand up and say, "Yes, we knew Dorothy wanted Cora to have these things. She talked about it constantly." The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. My parents' own neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, contacted Rebecca after hearing about the case through the small-town grapevine. She'd been at the yard sale, and she'd taken a video. Rebecca played it for me in her office. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone, but the audio was crystal clear. My mother's voice bright and cheerful as she talked to Mrs. Rodriguez. "Oh yes, just clearing out some old junk from the attic. My daughter was supposed to take this stuff years ago, but she never did. So finders keepers, right?" She laughed. That laugh was like a knife in my chest. Then my father's voice in the background, talking to James. "Take it all. My mother-in-law was a hoarder, honestly. We should have thrown this stuff away years ago, but my wife thought we should try to make a few bucks off it first." Rebecca paused the video and looked at me. "Cora, with this, we have them. They knew these items were meant for you. They're on video calling them junk, dismissing your grandmother as a hoarder, admitting they considered throwing everything away. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate." I felt numb. Hearing my father call Grandma a hoarder. Hearing my mother laugh about finders keepers with my inheritance. "What do we do now?" I asked quietly. Rebecca pulled out a formal letter already typed and printed on her law firm's letterhead. "We send them this. It's called a demand letter. It outlines exactly what they did, the legal violations, the financial damages, and the emotional distress. Then we give them 2 choices. They can compensate you for the full appraised value of the collection, $50,000, plus your legal fees. Or we file a lawsuit for conversion of property, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. In court, with the evidence we have, we'd likely win significantly more. Plus, it becomes public record. Everyone in their social circle would know what they did." My hands were shaking as I held the letter. It was written in that formal legal language that makes everything sound severe and final. But at the bottom, in plain English, was the deadline. 2 weeks. They had 2 weeks to decide. "Rebecca," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what if they choose the lawsuit? What if they fight this?" She reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. "Then we fight back. And Cora, we win. Because you have something they don't. What's that? The truth. And people who actually care about doing the right thing." The letter was sent on a Wednesday morning by certified mail requiring a signature. I knew the exact moment they received it because my phone started ringing 17 minutes later. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times. Then my father called. Then my mother again. They left voicemails, each one progressively more angry. I listened to them that night, alone in my apartment, with a glass of wine I couldn't drink and tears streaming down my face. Because even now, even after everything, part of me hoped they'd say they were sorry. Part of me hoped they'd finally understand. But they didn't. Not yet. The first voicemail was my mother, her voice shrill and indignant. Cora, what the hell is this? A lawsuit. You're threatening to sue your own parents over some old dolls. This is insane. Call me back right now. The second was my father using his controlled lawyer voice. The one that meant he was furious but trying to sound reasonable. Cora, this is getting out of hand. We need to talk like adults. This lawyer friend of yours is clearly putting ideas in your head. Call us. The seventh voicemail was different. My mother was crying. Real tears from the sound of it. Cora, please. You're tearing this family apart. How can you do this to us? We're your parents. We made one mistake. One mistake, and you're willing to destroy us over it. Your grandmother would be so ashamed of you right now. That last line, that's what broke me. I sat on my apartment floor with my phone in my hand, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Because even now, even in the middle of facing consequences for what they'd done, they were trying to manipulate me. They were trying to make me feel guilty. They were using Grandma's memory as a weapon against me. I called Rebecca at 11 o'clock at night. Did I do the wrong thing? I asked through my tears. Am I being cruel? Am I being the bad person here? She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I'll never forget. Cora, let me ask you something. If your grandmother was alive right now and she saw what your parents did, saw them sell her life's work for $20 and then laugh about it, what would she do? I closed my eyes and thought about Grandma. Strong, gentle Grandma who baked cookies and told stories and made quilts. But also Grandma who once threw a man out of her house for being rude to a waitress. Grandma who stopped speaking to her own sister for 3 years after that sister said something cruel about my grandfather's death. Grandma who had boundaries made of steel, wrapped in velvet. She'd be furious, I whispered. She'd never forgive them. Then you have your answer, Rebecca said gently. You're not being cruel. You're honoring her memory by refusing to let them erase it. The mediation happened 12 days later, in a conference room that smelled like artificial lemon and anxiety. My parents arrived with their own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who looked like she ate nails for breakfast. They wouldn't look at me, not when they walked in, not when we sat down at opposite sides of the long table, not when Rebecca laid out all the evidence in neat folders in front of everyone. Patricia spoke first, her voice clipped and professional. My clients acknowledged that there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of certain items. However, they dispute the claimed value and believe that any compensation should be minimal at best. Rebecca didn't even blink. She opened the first folder. Let's talk about the misunderstanding. Here's a video from the yard sale where Mrs. Bennett explicitly states, and I quote, "My daughter was supposed to take this stuff years ago. That's an acknowledgement that the items belong to Miss Bennett, not to them." She opened the second folder. Here's the will, filed with the probate court, specifically bequeathing the collection to Cora Bennett. Here's a notarized statement from Mr. Bennett dated 3 years ago, promising to keep said items safe for his daughter. And here are statements from 4 family members confirming that Dorothy Bennett consistently spoke about leaving these items to Cora specifically. My father's face was getting redder with each folder Rebecca opened. My mother had her arms crossed so tightly I thought she might crack a rib. Patricia cleared her throat. Regarding the value my clients had no reason to believe. Let me stop you right there, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. She pulled out the appraisals, the auction comparisons. James Morton's credentials spanning 37 years in the business. Your clients didn't care about the value because they didn't care about the items. They called Dorothy Bennett a hoarder. On video, they admitted they considered throwing everything in the trash. This isn't about what they knew or didn't know. This is about a deliberate disregard for their daughter's inheritance and their mother-in-law's legacy. The room went silent. Then my mother finally looked at me, her eyes red and angry. Cora, I can't believe you're doing this. We don't have $50,000 just lying around. You're going to force us to take out a second mortgage on our house. Our home. For what? 4 dolls. Something inside me snapped. I'd been quiet up until that moment, letting Rebecca handle everything. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. "They're not just dolls, Mom," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "They were Grandma. Every single one of them has a story she told me. Every quilt has hours of her time, her love. Her arthritic hands pushing a needle through fabric at midnight because she couldn't sleep. You sold her for $20. You sold my entire childhood, every memory I have of actually being loved for less than you spend on brunch." My father finally spoke, his voice tight. "We didn't know they were worth that much. You didn't care," I shot back. "That's the difference. You didn't care enough to ask me. You didn't care enough to honor your promise. You didn't care that those things were all I had left of her. You just wanted them gone so you could have more space for your golf clubs and your wine collection and whatever other expensive garbage you fill your lives with." My mother's face crumpled. "We raised you. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us." "You gave me things," I said quietly. "Grandma gave me love. There's a difference." The mediation lasted for hours. In the end, my parents didn't have $50,000. The truth came out in bitter, resentful pieces. They'd been living beyond their means for years, keeping up appearances. Buying things they couldn't afford to impress people they didn't even like. Their savings account was nearly empty. Taking out a second mortgage was their only option. We settled for $30,000, paid in full within 60 days. It was less than the collection was worth. But Rebecca advised me that getting something guaranteed was better than risking a lengthy court battle. Plus, James's auction was already scheduled. Between the settlement and my 70% of the auction proceeds, which ultimately sold for $62,000, I'd have enough. Enough to honor Grandma properly. The day the check arrived from my parents, there was no note, no apology. Just a cashier's check and a single sentence on a piece of paper in my father's handwriting. "We hope you're satisfied." I wasn't satisfied. I was heartbroken. Because even now, they didn't understand. They thought this was about money, about me punishing them or being greedy. They couldn't comprehend that this was about love, about keeping a promise to a woman who'd seen me when they never did. I used the money to buy back some of the collection at auction. Not all of its pieces went to museums, to collectors who would cherish them properly. But I bought back Charlotte with her auburn curls and Eleanor with her Parisian silk. I bought back 6 of Grandma's quilts, including the one she'd made for my birth and the one she'd finished just months before she died. Then I bought a small house. Nothing fancy, just a little 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town with good light and hardwood. Floors that creaked the way Grandma's floors used to creak. I turned the second bedroom into a sewing room, painted it the same pale yellow Grandma's had been. I put up shelves for the dolls and racks for the quilts. I hung photos of Grandma on the walls. Pictures of her smiling in her garden, holding me as a baby, standing proud at my high school graduation. Some evenings, I sit in that room with a cup of tea and just look at everything. I talk to the dolls the way Grandma used to, telling them about my day, sharing my thoughts. Sometimes I wrap myself in one of the quilts and cry. Sometimes I smile, remembering her hands showing me how to thread a needle. Her voice telling me stories about each piece. My parents and I don't speak anymore. 3 months after the settlement, my mother sent one final email. The subject line was empty. The message said only, "You destroyed this family over old junk. I hope it was worth it." I never replied. Because how do you explain to someone that it was never about the junk? How do you tell someone who's never truly loved anything beyond? It's price tag that some things are priceless not because of what they're worth, but because of who loved them. 6 months ago, I started volunteering at a senior center, teaching elderly women how to digitally preserve their family histories. I help them photograph their quilts, their collections, their treasures. I help them write down the stories so their grandchildren will know, will remember, will understand that these things matter. Last week, a woman named Martha brought in a box of handmade maiden dolls her mother had crafted in the 1930s. Her daughter wanted her to throw them away, said they were taking up space. Martha had tears in her eyes. "But they're all I have left of her," she whispered. I held her hand and said, "Then we make sure they're protected." We make sure no one can ever take them from you, 'cause that's what Grandma would have done. That's what she did do for me. My name is Cora Bennett. I'm 26 years old. I own a house filled with memories, a heart that's still healing, and a promise I've finally kept. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect your heart are the first ones to break it. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you cruel, it makes you strong. And I learned that love, real love, the kind my grandmother gave me, doesn't have a price tag, it's priceless. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever had someone betray your trust or dismiss something you held sacred, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. Sometimes protecting what matters means losing people you thought would always be there. Hit that like button if you believe some things are worth fighting for. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to be walked over, who chose themselves, who honored the people who truly loved them. And tell me in the comments, would you have done what I did? Would you have sued your own parents? Or would you have let it go? I'll be reading every single response. Because your stories matter too. Your pain matters. Your boundaries matter. And sometimes, just sometimes, revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about refusing to let them hurt you anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me honor my grandmother's memory one more time.